By the time Hugo arrived breathlessly at the scene, the mansion was ablaze, thick black smoke billowing into the air. Several tourists who had planned a day of sightseeing were now frantically running away, shouting loudly. Initially intending a short visit, they ended up staying longer than expected, becoming victims of the fire. The family now had to deal with the arrangement of the burial. Hugo chased after like a dog in pursuit, but he couldn't catch up to his perverted friend, who often pulled off strange antics. Hugo couldn't even cry. He only hoped to find Jun. The crowd was in a panic, running in all directions. Jun was making his way through a side alley alone, dragging a large bag on the ground while complaining about being hungry. Finally, Hugo spotted him and shouted loudly, but Jun showed no surprise at seeing him. He remained very calm and asked, "Ha, I love old friend. It's been 20 years since we last met, not just yesterday, so stay calm. Come over here." Jian stood still, waiting for a hug from Hugo. Unexpectedly, Hugo ran over, grabbed the young man's shoulders from behind, and shook him violently as if trying to rattle his brain. In his ear, he could hear grumbling mixed with indistinct questions. After this incident, he would surely need a haircut. Let his hair grow a bit past his shoulders, and he would be mistaken for the main character. Jian was very annoyed now. He kicked Hugo squarely in the face to remind him how his friend looked, and if his eyesight was poor, he should avoid mistaking others for his friend. Seeing the bizarre situation unfold, the strange youth quickly fled from there. Hugo was in so much pain from the kick that he felt like he could suffer psychological trauma, but before he could say anything, his eyes were glued to the circle worn on Jian's shoulder. It turned out to be the holy relic that Jian was carrying. Realizing this, Hugo slowly looked up at Jian's face, filled with bulging veins, and Jian gritted his teeth, asking, "Do you need a few more punches to wake up, Otiksu?" Suddenly, Hugo embraced Jian, finally realizing that his friend was not a stranger. The emotional reunion of the close friends after 20 years apart was very dramatic, but Hugo received another punch from Jian to his stomach. "Dan, it's been 20 years and you still don't recognize me? I'm still straight, you know." At this point, it was definitely Jian, and Hugo couldn't argue back. At that moment, the system abruptly popped up, announcing that Apollo, the centaur god, had appeared. Why would the god of the centaurs appear here instead with Hugo? Suddenly, a blinding golden light appeared, rendering both Hugo and Jian speechless as they stared at Apollo, who had just arrived in an incredibly extravagant style, as if stepping out of an animated movie. Though extremely handsome with sparkling light effects, nobody understood why Apollo had shown up. Apollo frowned at the two, looking suspicious. Hugo was equally confused, unsure why his god had come here, while staring intently at Jian, the friend who had just returned from the dead. Only the system knew the story beforehand. With a perplexed look, Apollo whispered to Hugo, asking him to check if this was the real Jian or just a fake version. Dan, the deity, wanted to test by shooting an arrow to see what would happen. Jian had been angry all this time, but hadn't had the chance to speak. Clearly, this was a centaur god, not the love god Cupid. Why did he keep aiming at others' behinds with his bow? Hugo stood in the middle, trying to calm his fury. Jian decided to shift his target to his friend and reminded him of the promise made over the phone. "Remember, I'm coming to kill you. Good luck. Now is the time for me to fulfill my trustworthy words." As soon as Jian stepped out of the tower, he learned that his house had been sold. The will had been altered all over the place, and artifacts from his home had disappeared. Isn't that infuriating? They were both saints, yet why did his friend look so strange now? Jian appeared extremely sinister and was determined to punch his friend to relieve his frustration. The sound of a thud rang out as if a heavy object had fallen to the ground, but it was not just a light punch. Hugo got hit hard enough to swell his head, yet he still had to smile, thanking heaven. God has brought that brutish friend back to me. If he didn't hit me, that it surely wasn't him. Before he could deal with Apollo, many people rushed out from the Birch Mansion, pointing fingers at Jian, ganging up on him for stealing artifacts. Being a saint, yet going into someone else's house to snatch their things without permission, Hugo asked what he had taken for so many people to show up. Jian pointed to a sack like Santa Claus's bag and said, "I only took this little bit." "This little bit?" Half of Yang Wei's artifacts were in that sack. Jian leaned on his hand, looking proud, and asked his friend, "Do you think I'm awesome?" Hugo had hated this fat kid for a long time, but now seeing Jian looking cheerful like a child, with plenty of Birch House goods, he didn't bother to mention that stealing is wrong anymore. The guards of the Birch Mansion were ready to pounce, but the captain raised his hand to stop them. "That person is not as lowly as we are. To deal with him, I have invited a more capable character." As soon as he finished speaking, the wind picked up violently. Hugo was startled and looked around to see what was happening. A dark figure jumped down from the roof of the Birch Mansion, the very character the guards had invited. Gigantic legs crashed down onto the stone floor. It was the guardian spirit of the Birch, representing prosperity, come to snap Jun's neck. The enormous creature, half lion and half ram, roared thunderously, its saliva splattering everywhere as a greeting. Its shadow loomed over the two below. Hugo quickly sensed that a big fight was about to happen. He advised Jian to toss aside all the goods he had stolen from Yang Wei and run away, planning to think things through later when he had the chance. But Jian didn't panic as Hugo thought he would. He wore a confident smile and asserted, "I am a planner, not some brainless idiot who barges into someone else's house to steal, and when faced with a challenge, I just dump my stuff and run away. Lime, hand me a sword." Jian's artifact chuckled in amusement. It was already well aware of its master's unruly personality. Its eyes glowed brightly, and hundreds of weapon images flitted about like a lucky draw. Once it selected a suitable item, its entire body emitted a lovely pink light. The crooked mouth spit out a hilt for Jian. He reached out to grab it, wearing a cunning smile as he swung the sword in the palm of his hand. But to his surprise, the sword was no different from a fruit knife. Jian thought to himself that this size was insufficient, gripped the sword horizontally, and muttered, "Show me your true strength." His whole body radiated the familiar blue light of the Ophiuchus constellation. The air around began to move vigorously, gathering towards Jian, leaving Hugo beside him bewildered. This energy felt too familiar. Suddenly, a loud explosion sounded as something dropped onto the tiled floor. Jian appeared with a sword that had completely transformed, looking extremely flashy. With a green aura swirling around the sword, it was clear this was an ancient sword, infused with energy from the Ophiuchus constellation, receiving a critical elemental burst. To enhance its prestige, the hilt of the sword showcased a snake coiled around the blade, thick and thorny, as if lightning coursed within it. Before entering the battle, the system reminded Jian that the 13th sense skill allowed him to see the lethal weak points of his enemies. Jian activated the skill and immediately saw the weak points of the White Birch Guardian, located at the joints of its front and hind legs. Those glaring weak points suited him perfectly. Jian took his sword and rushed towards the gigantic beast. Seeing this scene, Hugo couldn't help but remember the old days, the time when his friend didn't know what fear of death was, charging straight at the enemy to fight head-on. "Kill it, my friend," Hugo thought to himself. Such a powerful and reckless fighting style could only be done by Jian, and today Hugo was very happy to witness that scene again. The front leg of the spirit beast slammed down as Jian was flying by, like swatting a buzzing fly. "Oh my god, I haven't even struck a blow yet. It's already crushed like that. There's nothing left to bury." Hugo silently complained. Under the guardian spirit, John's impatient voice suddenly rang out. "It's really a birch. Stuffing it to get fat, almost suffocating me." He bent his arms to lift the front leg of the creature, grumbling and cursing. After the cursing came the fighting. A smile spread across John's face. Before he could even make a move, the guardian spirit experienced a pain that spread throughout its body. The front leg that had just crushed John was now soaring in the air, no longer attached at the joint. The birch guardian spirit let out a roar that shook the heavens, mourning for its leg. The system reminded Jin that the spirit beast was using another ability to retaliate. The creature roared, as if calling for something. It turned out that it was absorbing all the prosperity around to make power for itself. Truly a prosperous guardian spirit, always sucking in prosperity when needed and creating a noisy storm. "I don't like it at all. I'd rather you sit still. I would go easier on you," Jian grumbled. He activated the high damage attribute of the serpent constellation on the sword once again, slinging it over his shoulder before swinging it down, not forgetting to whisper, "Let's cuddle a bit." Jian's serpent sword slashed decisively into the ground, but not due to a missed target. From his sword emerged a long, black line resembling a snake, launching toward the spirit beast. The line of energy struck the beast hard, making it let out a pitiful roar. The entire courtyard and the mansion behind the spirit beast were affected as if they had just been bombed from above. Dirt, rocks, and buildings were sent flying. Some unfortunate bodyguards standing nearby were caught in the backlash, suffering minor scratches at best and serious injuries at worst. Amid the thick dust, Hugo was so shocked that he could not close his mouth, merely standing there gawking at his friend like a villain reveling in destruction. As the smoke cleared, a long trench created by John was revealed, originating from where he stood, collapsing the entire mansion of the Ares behind it, stretching for hundreds of meters. The destructive power is incredible, Hugo thought to himself. Looking at the wondrous blue energy, he couldn't help but remember the golden era of Jian, when his hair had not yet fallen out and his eyes had not yet gone blind. The spirit beast lay in a heap like a dry dung pile under the blazing sun, look out too late to utter any last words. In addition to the experience points awarded by the system, it also asked Jun if he wanted to keep the spirit beast as a prosperous guardian for himself. Jian walked closer to the spirit beast's corpse, deep in thought. "I can't believe it, even though I'm also called a saint. I've never received blessings from the deities. I've never had the power to control a guardian spirit like the other 12 zodiac saints. Now suddenly being granted this skill, it would be foolish not to accept it, Jian thought. His hand just touched the fur of the spirit beast, and the entire body of the creature was instantly enveloped by his power. The drooping wings now spread wide. The spirit beast had successfully become the guardian deity of the snake handler in a form that could hardly be described in words, resembling a scruffy Tibetan mastiff with a pair of angel wings, rather than the fierce creature it was before. Moreover, the spirit beast voluntarily shrank in size so Jian could lift it. It was quickly assigned the task of guarding its master's belongings. As a prosperous guardian deity, it could certainly hold all of Jian's belongings. Jian was very happy, hugging the spirit beast as if he had just received a gift from his mother, not caring about anyone else. Hero stood at a distance, looking confused. What on earth had happened before they returned that his friend now possessed such absurd abilities, including the power to turn someone else's guardian into his own? Suddenly, Jian froze when the system requested a new name for the spirit beast, as it had become his personal guardian deity. Piggy Bank. Jian was excited about the quality name he had just come up with, making Hugo stifle a laugh. A mafia piggy bank doesn't hold money, only weapons, Hugo thought to himself. Under the crimson sunset, in front of Hugo's two-story house, Jian exclaimed 3 words laced with mockery. Traitor! Jian aimed that remark at his close friend, causing Hugo to get irritated, intending to retort but wasn't quick enough. Jian continued to ramble, accusing Hugo of living a comfortable life while he struggled to survive in the Demon Tower, while out here, Hugo got married, started a family, and enjoyed everything. My friend, I barely recognize you after just 20 years. I live worse than a dog in the Demon Tower. Did you sleep well at night? Hugo had to hold himself back from running over to punch Jian. He continued to play the sulky face along with an extremely skillful display of ignoring. Jian pretended to say that he didn't dare stay at his friend's house anymore, but when he heard Hugo say he lived alone, he changed his tone to comfort. Having a wife and living alone must be lonely, right? Hugo was speechless, stammering that he hadn't divorced yet, but it was a long story, and he didn't know how to tell it properly. He deflected back to John's situation, asking about what had happened in the Demon Tower. At that time, I followed your advice to deal with the troubles outside, so I had no idea what you were doing inside. How could everyone bring the head of the red-eyed devil out, but not bring you out? Jian smirked, keeping a cheerful yet slightly mocking expression. He glanced at Hugo and simply said, That day, I was stabbed in the back and pushed into a trap they had set up. Down in that pit were hundreds of monsters lying in wait, plus the resurrected red-eyed devil as a bonus. It was quite a surprise, my friend. I knew Hugo would be shocked. Jian continued, The red-eyed devil we saw was not its true form. Its real entity lies deep within the tower. I witnessed the terrifying power of that monster when I fell into that pit. Jian fast-forwarded through the beginning and middle, then recounted the ending. I managed to fend for myself and defeat the monster. But the problem was not the red-eyed devil. It was someone controlling the tower from behind, possessing the ability to resurrect the dead calamities to torment me over and over again. The deeper he went, the more Jian felt the path out was narrowing, but he kept advancing until he could kill the final boss. I died stupidly from a rock falling on my head, and I can be sure I logged out of Earth's server that time. When I woke up, there were no monsters around me. I couldn't understand why there was suddenly an earthworm-shaped figure in my hand. Jian clenched his fist, trying to suppress the rising anger in his chest. The guy who stabbed me in the back that day knew the structure inside the Devil's Tower very well, so he pushed me down to be torn apart to death. If I find out who it is, their entire family will get a special massage treatment from me. Hugo listened but didn't understand what Jian intended to do, yet he followed along. The first step of the plan was for me to create a spoon to shovel the essence into the mouth of that evil. Jian laughed loudly, raising his hand to summon the first-level workshop of the system. Jian scrolled through the screen to see what materials he could use. There were an eye-like sphere from 10 years ago, a holy relic from the Birch Estate, and fragments of Calamity to increase the absorption rate of magical power. Jian wasn't a great chef, but he thought that if he threw everything into the pot and stirred it for a while, even if it didn't turn out delicious, it would at least be a quality pig feed. Channeling all the magic power into the toy horse, the system emitted a beam of light. After that, everything had to be left to the system to create for him a red horse called Holy Relic du Ma with functions beyond expectations. When a name is written on a horse, the owner of that name can absorb up to 10% of the magical power from anyone they touch. Besides its appearance and versatility, what Jian likes most is the absolute loyalty of the horse to its owner. Hugo must think it's too easy for him to create a holy relic, so he asks, why does it sound like there are many unexpected conveniences when the outside looks so desolate and primitive? Before the horse could curse, Jian already cursed for it. Team of how many valuable materials I've put into this, I was planning to make you another one, but if you don't like it, then that's that. Hitting a sensitive spot, Hugo immediately switched to the role of the protagonist like a movie where the mask is flipped to reveal a criminal. Oh, my friend, what a brilliant design. The creator of this is truly talented. I have shown it my absolute respect. Can you hear my heart's voice? Jian didn't want to hear any more, setting that matter aside. He put his things in his bag and prepared to find the trashy saints to teach them a lesson. He pulled out a gaudy yellow box and said, if the saints are holed up in their territory, the only way is to lure them out. Seeing the white birch head outside the box, Hugo shrieked in panic. Isn't that a storage holy relic? Besides storing anything, if the right price is paid, the user can develop the item placed inside. Hugo looked at it with mild greed. After all, this was a holy relic ranked in the top 10. But the important question was what Jian was carrying it for, since it belonged to the birch and only the birch saints could use it. Jian replied, I've heard the centaur saint is broke with not a single penny, so I'm bringing this to you so you can earn some more. Hugo angrily retorted, I have money already. Jian continued, the higher the rank of the holy relic, the more expensive and hard to find materials are. I want to take advantage of this to find a lot of necessary materials and also make the high-ranking saints tear each other apart. Hugo still didn't understand how Jian intended to use it if no one could activate the holy relic. He foolishly asked, why can't you activate it? Jian wanted to jump up and grab Hugo's hair right then. I'm a saint of the Sagittarius, not some idiot. I'm not Aries. At that moment, Jian realized his own foolishness, letting out a weary sigh. It can't be used, then we need to find another way, my friend. If we can't open it, how can we stuff it in? Putting away the holy relic was easy, but Jian decided to do something harder. He claimed he had already sent out the challenge letter. Hugo's face paled as he asked back, where did the challenge letter go? Looking at Jian's face, Hugo knew for sure that his friend had pulled another strange stunt. The challenge letter had certainly ended up somewhere it shouldn't have. Under the brilliant sunset sky, far from Hugo's home, an important meeting was taking place at the Blue House of South Korea. It began with terrible curses. You useless bunch. Can't even eliminate a spider monster and still bring shame upon yourselves. The commander of the Saintly Lion Order, Oliver, propped his feet up on the table, expressing his disdain. These officials can't even solve a simple issue. On the other side, someone reminded Oliver to watch his language, but was immediately brushed off. Is the rumor true that some nobody killed the Spider Queen, or is the story about Li Jun rising from the grave real? The porcelain object on the table exploded, cutting the argument short. The commander of the Saintly Gemini Order, Choi Sung-yuk, smiled, but it was clear he was not pleased. Stop talking about Li Jun. I'm starting to get annoyed. Huh! Oliver still maintained his arrogant demeanor and retorted, don't you see the fat guy Yang Wei getting beaten up like a dog? It's all over the internet in that video they spread around. Sung-yuk tried to redirect Oliver's thoughts. Some nameless guy just got some stuff from the divine being. It's not that powerful. Oliver immediately scoffed in response. It's easy to say that, but why doesn't Gemini go and eliminate that female spider themselves? The other person angrily replied, watch your words. I have evidence that Aries and Gemini contributed to the killing of the Spider Queen. There was even an S-class apostle who sacrificed himself. Oliver wouldn't back down, unleashing the golden power behind him, and asked, isn't that S-class guy already in the Spider Queen's belly? Twice Sung-yuk fell silent, quietly suppressing his anger, but the purple aura emanating from him clashed with Oliver's golden light, causing the leaders sitting above to break into a sweat. He seemed furious with those two, but also frustrated with the state of the greenhouse. And gone from a political discussion to a marketplace for two thugs arguing. Suddenly, an employee pushed the door open and came in, inviting the president to see the latest news. Everyone's faces were filled with fear as if someone had pointed a gun at their heads, announcing that the broadcasting station had just received a mysterious package filled with torture photos of Yang Wei, along with a note written in bright red ink. I'm back. What the hell? The handwriting on it was confirmed to match 99% with Li Jun, who was supposed to be dead. Hugo shouted, questioning his friend lying on the bed. What the hell were you thinking announcing to the whole world that you're back? Killing Yang Wei is enough to stir the whole world. Now go in public like this, aren't you afraid everyone will rush to find you? Hugo didn't understand why his friend chose such a bizarre way to seek revenge. What are you talking about? Jian, upon hearing this, tilted his head to clarify. Yang Wei isn't dead. He's just joking around, sitting up and rummaging through his bag. He just doesn't look very alive, that's all. Hugo was confused. What does this guy mean? Not alive means dead, so how can it be not looking alive? Jian jumped up, smiling, pulling something out of the bag, saying something nonsensical. Here. Yang Wei is right here, my friend. In John's hand was a yellow teddy bear held by its ears. Although it couldn't speak, if one listened closely, the sound of Yang Wei's screams could be heard coming from within. Son of a bitch, Li Jian. On. Hugo was panic-stricken. Please don't tell me this is Yang Wei. He seemed terrified, wanting to flee from the bizarre stuffed animal. Meanwhile, Jian lifted the bear by its ears, twisting it with delight. My power is now so strong that I can completely control the soul of another saint. His grip tightened more and more. Although the teddy bear couldn't open its mouth to speak, Jian insisted on giving orders. Introduce yourself, slave number 2. Suddenly, Jian remembered something more important. He handed Hugo an object. Look at this. This is the knife that was stabbed into my back and pushed me into that trap. Hugo was astonished. Shit, he's talking about a terrifying experience of being killed, but his face is excited like he's logging a ghost story. Hugo seriously assessed the intricate carvings on the knife, realizing it wasn't an ordinary knife. However, he believed Yang Wei didn't have the guts to stab Jian in the back. Jian continued. He didn't dare to do it, but surely he knows who did. See this? I'm torturing Yang Wei's soul right here. Jian carried the stuffed bear on his back and said, I'm going to the Holy Relic shop for a bit because this bald fat guy has seen a sculpture on the knife there. By the way, before leaving, Jian borrowed a few outfits from Hugo so he wouldn't be considered messy. Of course, Hugo did mine. After wandering around the house, Jian stuffed his hands into his pockets and said goodbye to slave number 2. As if knowing his friend would wonder who slave number 1 was, he foolishly waved his hand. I'll be home soon, slave number 1. Then he walked away, ignoring Hugo's curses. It was already dark. At the Ares mansion, which Jian had thoroughly wrecked, a group of people in sharp black suits appeared. Everyone was busy assessing the damage. Leading them was a girl making a phone call. The Ares saint is not here. The person on the other end chuckled, lightly twirling a stream of water in her hand. It was Sophie Marnie, the Aquarius saint. She asked her subordinate, Where do you think that fat guy went? Her subordinate reported, All of Ares' wealth has disappeared. This made Sophie anxious. That bald guy might have run away to join forces with another saint, making things more troublesome. As she furrowed her brows in thought, her subordinate voiced a suspicion. Is it possible that Li Jian returned and took him away? In the luxurious bathroom, with steam filling the air, Sophie burst into laughter. After laughing to her heart's content, she murmured, That's not funny. With a flick of his hand, the water in the bathroom surged, grabbing the head of a nearby maid, lifting her high and swirling continuously as if trying to suffocate her. The sound of gasping for breath echoed from the phone. The black-clad subordinate realized that his words had caused serious consequences and hurriedly apologized. At that moment, the maid was finally released, just as another subordinate rushed in with dire news. Miss, another holy relic has signed up for the upcoming drachma auction. That night, many distant cities began to buzz with excitement. At the Lion's Gym, the bodybuilders looked in one direction, awestruck by the man lifting a ton of weights against the wall. A subordinate quietly stepped forward, whispering, There are rumors that Li Jian's holy relic will appear at the upcoming drachma auction. The man glared back, revealing a long scar on his cheek that looked menacing, then dropped the weights to the ground as if the news had enraged him. Yet, a smile grew on his lips. Stephen Maker brushed his messy brown hair with excitement. Finally, a thing has appeared. It must belong to us. The door shifted, casting a blinding blue light, slowly revealing 2 figures, one tall and one short. Today, Jian was not wearing the thief's sandals anymore, perhaps because he had acquired these shoes from Hugo's place. Next to him was Song Jia, the friend's son who had brought him to this place, using the free teleportation service reserved for twins. Both of them walked briskly down the busy street. Jian thanked Song Jia for eagerly taking him to meet the SS-level evaluator just when he needed it. On the outside, Song Jia forced a smile, but inside he just wanted to scream because ultimately he was just being pressured to gather more information about the one who defeated the Spider Queen, not because he was eager for anything. Song Jia's phone was filled with reminder messages from the Holy Commander of the Twin Saints. Though he didn't say it out loud, Jian knew very well that his nephew was being coerced. He extended his hand to offer a knife already sheathed in leather, simply saying, This is what I use to fight the hordes at the Demon Tower. This engraved knife allows you to summon warriors and activate random skills. But in Song Jae's eyes, it was nothing but a rusty old thing. Anyway, if someone gives it to you, just accept it. As soon as he finished speaking, Jian realized they had arrived in front of a building with ancient architecture, the residence of the SS-level evaluator. The pedestrians on the street suddenly buzzed, pointing at someone who had just appeared, making the whole street lively. It was the Saintess of Aquarius, who suddenly appeared in her signature zodiac outfit. She led a group of all-female followers, striding confidently down the street. In the eyes of the people, Saintess Sophie Marty represented all the best things in the world like a lost angel. Looking into her eyes, one could forget the way home. However, one of the subordinates of the evaluator remained alert. He rushed out, awkwardly asking the Saintess to stop. The evaluator currently has an appointment with someone else, ma'am. On the outside, Sophie plays the role of a gentle and understanding Saintess, but inside she silently curses the evaluator for being unreasonable and making her wait. Is there still someone making an appointment at this hour? Who on earth is inside? The person inside curiously examines the various items displayed on the appraiser's shelves, exclaiming, "The prices of these items are indeed sky-high, truly deserving of the SX grade." The appraiser intensely studies the holy relic that Sung Jae brought and asks, "Who made this?" Jin Myung, an SX grade appraiser with many years of experience, is considered one of the veterans. He sweats profusely as he delivers his assessment. This item is very likely related to Sir Lee Jun. Sung Jae doesn't want to frighten the old man further, so he softly smiles, points to Jun, and says he made it. He's a fan of the 13th Saint. The appraiser nods but still tells Sung Jae, "You should go outside. I have something important to discuss with this person." As soon as he turns to leave, the appraiser immediately asks, "What is your relationship with Sir Lee Jun?" Due to his outstanding combat abilities, few pay attention to him. But for me, as a legendary craftsman who has seen countless counterfeit Lee Jun items, I can immediately tell there is a true presence here. That's why he presses him for information. If someone with advanced expertise recognizes the genuine item he crafted, Jian would be pleased, but without stating the truth, he only praises the old man's discerning eye. Suddenly, his face turned bright red, shy as if talking about something embarrassing. He admitted, "I am the disciple that Master Lee Jian cherishes the most in the world." Jian was not surprised that he suddenly had a disciple, but he did not understand why this person had a shy expression like a girl confessing her love. He stood there, his face full of confusing question marks. Jin Myung had turned back with the object that needed to be appraised, mumbling, "This person cannot possibly be related to Lee Jian." Just as he was about to punch him a few times for pretending to be gay, Jin Myung handed him a leather-bound notebook, saying, "This is the item I received when I became disciple of the sage." At first glance, Jian realized that this seemed to be the notebook he had lost. Finally, he recognized that this old appraiser was the guy who started out in the profession, trailing him throughout China over 20 years ago, asking him to pass on his skills, which he had refused. Time had passed, and the once talkative young man had now become a middle-aged man full of melancholy. No wonder Lee Jian remembered him. Jin Myung raised the notebook high, crying, "That day, Master Lee Jian left behind the only keepsake that I hold dear in my heart." A very touching moment, but for Jian, it felt like a cold. He thought he had lost it, but it turned out this guy had stolen the notebook. Jin Myung flipped through a few pages, mumbling that he could not make out the content because the handwriting was too bad, wanting to follow the ideas crafted in it, but failing. He privately thought those were a list of items he did not want to introduce. However, he closed the book, his face illuminated with kindness as he handed it to Jian, saying, "If you are so passionate about the 13th Sage, then take it back to study." Jian immediately took it, remembering that he had casually written down a few of his designs in it. Having it ready was good. The moment his hand touched the notebook, the skill the god of gaze allowed him to channel magical power into the notebook right away. Jin Myung looked on anxiously as the light seeped into the cover, thinking that the young man in front of him had the skill to read the holy relics that stored memories. Just as he was about to ask for the information inside, the hurried voice of a servant calling from outside interrupted. The servant pointed outside, reporting that the saintess had arrived. Jin Myung didn't care much. She arrived, so what? It doesn't concern me. Why does everyone have to make such a fuss? Sophie had been patiently waiting outside for a while. The place she stood quickly turned into a red carpet for people to take photos and shoot videos just like an event. She lowered her head, silently cursing those bothersome people. "Every time I go out, I wear this outfit and they still make a huge commotion." Sung Jae stood in the crowd, excited but not particularly eager, having heard that whenever Sophie left the temple, she always brought trouble to others. After waiting for over half an hour without seeing the examiner invite him in, and with the crowd continuously flashing lights, Sophie completely lost her patience. She dashed inside, ignoring the guard at the door who was trying to stop her. Sophie decisively stepped in, wanting to see who the guest was that Jin Myung valued more than a saintess. Unexpectedly, upon seeing the person in front of her, she froze for a few seconds as her attention was caught by the handsome face of that individual. Suddenly, Sophie's heart blew with joy. No matter if they were a saintess, she still preferred handsome appads. Excitedly, she moved closer for a better look when suddenly, an image of a gigantic snake flashed in her mind, its large, ferocious mouth lunging towards Sophie, causing her to turn pale and collapse to the ground in fear. What was that? Sophie felt sweat pouring down her sides, wondering why it felt like hundreds of giant snakes were coiling around her, tightening and threatening. This is not good at all. Sophie Marnie ran outside with a panicked expression, leaving her followers puzzled and scrambling to catch up. The two people in the shop didn't understand why such strange behavior occurred, and Jian didn't care much either. Just as he was about to return to his items, the assessment system informed him that someone had approached the Snake Master. His divine power currently stood at 35%. He wondered what divine power was, and the system immediately replied, "It is a type of strength bestowed in a sacred form, which requires the addition of a core personality trait of Jian, namely that he can absorb divine power from others to increase his own. If it remains at 0% for too long, he will lose his strength." Pointing outside, Li Jian wondered, "Who is that girl who just ran away?" Jin Miang asked him back with a confused tone, "How can you not know when the saintess appears so frequently in the apostolic newspapers?" When he heard that it was the saintly protector Sophie Maldi, Li Jian froze for a second and then burst out laughing, nearly crying. "Oh shit, I thought the saintess was some gibbon that everyone talked about so cautiously. Turns out it was that old hag. It's just some tricks. Her looks aren't like that at all. No wonder Li Jian didn't recognize her. In the past, she was also considered pretty, but beneath that face was the hollow, decaying soul. That's why her beauty could never sway Li Jian. On the list of things he hated the most, besides fish bones, flies, and trash, Sophie was like a disgusting crawling insect that made him feel nauseated. Her skincare routine was more important to her than human life. Li Jian turned his head to mock Jin Myung, not understanding why people worshipped her as a representative of compassion and selflessness when she was clearly a selfish and ruthless individual. From their conversation, he learned from Jin Myung that Sophie had embezzled money thanks to the title of the 13th Saint. It was only after the government intervened that the issue was resolved. Seeing Li Jian's face contort as if he were severely constipated, Jin Myung questioned his attitude. "Do you seem familiar with the saintess?" Jian replied, "How could I be even slightly acquainted? Just call me her old friend." Sophie ran rapidly until she reached a small, deserted alley where she gradually slowed down. Her subordinate chased after her, worried and asking questions for a long time, but she was still too panicked to respond. The incident inside the appraisal shop reminded Sophie of Jian's piercing gaze as he looked at her years ago, fiercely asking, "Do you want to die?" She thought she had buried the memories deep down, but unexpectedly, this time she was threatened by John's ugly, scarred face. All of this was because of that young man. She didn't understand why it stirred such terror within her. She ordered her subordinate to return and investigate the brown-haired guy in the appraisal shop. When her subordinate asked if they should investigate the appraiser, Sophie immediately changed her mind, her mouth curling into a delighted smile. "I will heal both of them." Her subordinate spoke up to intervene, insisting they should keep Jin Myung alive, but Sophie brushed it off. Both of those people deserved to die. She held up the chain around her neck for her subordinate to see, smiling sweetly, saying she would lend the relic and the power of the god to kill those two. The subordinate wanted to advise her further since they were in neutral territory. Sophie thrust the bracelet forward, her face wearing a kind smile, but radiating a terrifying energy that made the girl instantly step back, unable to argue any further. The will of the saintess was the will of the god. Kneeling on one knee, she raised her hands respectfully to accept the bracelet Sophie handed her. She repeated to herself, "The will of the saintess is the will of heaven, and the apostle must carry it out at all costs." Sophie was finally satisfied, smiling gently. At that moment, she retracted the image of the divine guardian shining brightly behind her, thinking she might as well cause this subordinate to log out as well. At that moment, Li Jian was sitting and talking with Jin Myung in the shop when he suddenly felt something wet on his head, as if water was dripping from somewhere. Outside the downtown area, the lights from the shops and houses twinkled. Song Jia left Jian alone in the appraisal shop to stroll around, waiting for him to finish. Suddenly, he looked down at his feet and saw something strange. He stopped, focused his gaze on the puddle of water at his feet, confused about where it came from, and it seemed to be spreading even though it wasn't raining. Song Jae bent down to take a closer look, realizing there was a magical force within it. Suddenly, the shadow in the water turned an unusual shade of white. Two figures appeared, glowing brightly, and reached out their hands as if to grab Song Jae. The glass of iced milk coffee fell immediately due to the horrifying scene before him. The water congealed into the shape of a human crawling towards Song Jae, resembling the crawling ghosts in horror films, making him pale with fear. How could there be ghosts in a brightly lit area on the street? Suddenly, a scream rang out from behind. Song Jae turned around and discovered that everyone around him saw the water ghost just like he did, surfacing from the ground, staring at their own forms. The one responsible for this scene stood on the roof of a building, looking down. Who else but Sophie Marty would cast the duplicating mirror? Although the duplicates only possessed powers similar to that of A-rank apostles, a large number could still take down an elephant. Besides, in the appraisal shop, there were only two people, one old and one young. Sung Jae ran back to the appraisal shop. As soon as he saw the back of the Saintess's guard, he shouted out loud, "Why are you using combat skills in the neutral zone like that? Cancel it immediately." She turned around and calmly looked at Sung Jae, holding a beautifully crafted cup in her hand, saying that this was the Saintess's order, so he should be quiet. This was the will of the higher-ups. She suddenly placed the holy cup on the ground, activating the holy relic and causing it to shine brilliantly. Sung Jae, startled, rushed to stop her, but it was too late. A column of light shot straight up into the night sky as if a famous idol were performing there. Dozens of streams of water burst up from the ground, swirling into large circles that surrounded everyone in the neighborhood. The summoned water spirits of those people would work together to deal with Jin Myung. The young man who was a guest in that shop would be dealt with by her own hands. The water spirits quickly followed the orders and created a puddle of slimy water above the spot where Jian had seen earlier. Sung Jae, panicked, swam in the water sphere, not understanding when they had planned the attack. His palms tried to summon power, needing to escape from there quickly before losing consciousness. Sung Jae's vision began to fade, gradually wanting to close, surrounded by endless water. At that moment, Jian in the shop realized that the water infused with magical power was not from rain seeping down. He quietly watched as it continued to flow down in increasing amounts. Jin Myung also felt the magical energy around him, looking around confused, and the water gathered together like a rope and lifted him high up. Something sharp rushed forward and pressed against Jian's neck, and he didn't seem surprised at all. The female bodyguard whispered, "Don't move. I don't want to kill you yet. Explain that this is because you have displeased the Saintess. But don't forget the threat. Resisting will lead to your death. Don't be foolish. The Saintess has ordered me to kill two people. But if you admit your mistake to the Saintess and Jin Myung is willing to buy the holy relic at a high price, I will speak in your favor in front of Sophie." What a kind-hearted bodyguard, threatening others but offering negotiation terms. Too merciful, to the point that the evaluating uncle didn't even bother to respond. Suddenly, Jian asked, sounding exasperated, "Is it normal to walk around the street holding a knife?" Jin Myung widened his eyes, watching him grasp the broken knife handle between his two fingers. Maybe he's just old? Back in his time, no one dared to wield a weapon carelessly. Jin dropped the knife to the ground, chuckled, and said, "Jin Myung, why don't you calculate the damages here and have them pay a bit?" Seeing Jian break the holy relic knife, it seemed like he was on his side. But Jin Myung still didn't dare to speak up. What kind of person could do that with bare hands? The female subordinate seemed to be around 30 years old and had never encountered such a situation before. She angrily said, "You must not move, didn't you hear?" The A-class water spirits gathered behind, rushing towards Jian to silence him. But upon arrival, they were scattered like water splashed from a bucket as a single punch from Jian sent them crashing to the ground. With that same punch, he smiled kindly and asked, "Hey, do you have more? Call them out. It's quite fun to punch." The female bodyguard took a few steps back, warily observing the young man before her. Just as the same test had predicted, being able to punch away A-class water spirits with bare hands definitely indicated he was not an ordinary person. If that's the case, I must eliminate him to avoid putting the Saintess in danger. The nonchalant demeanor of Jin Myung is really irritating. She pulled out the necklace that Sophie had given her and splashed a stream of pure magical water that Sophie had personally infused. Puddles began to form into the shape of a pack of wolves, which according to the guard were A-rank water wolves. Using A-rank creatures to cause trouble for Jian is a waste of effort to provoke him for a laugh. Sophie, that little demon, certainly had a grand way of greeting him. Without knowing where he pulled out two daggers from, he asked Jin Myung, "Can I borrow these daggers for a bit? Whether I return them later depends on my mood." He didn't wait for her to answer. Jian, like a rocket being launched, shot forward and confronted the aggressive pack of water wolves alone. Wherever he went, it meant death for them, and he even let out a gleeful shout. "These daggers are really sharp. I like them so much, I'll give them a like." His blade struck the water wolves, bringing back magical information from the mirror as if he was in a slaughter mode. Jian dove into slicing the A-rank creatures with delight, laughing joyfully. Why is it so fun to just appraise items? Wherever his blade went, Jian reaped rewards. He collected shards of replica mirrors, experience points, and various miscellaneous items related to the water wolves that belonged to the Saintess. It's unknown what rank the Saintess's subordinates were, but they stood there in shock, unable to believe their eyes. The summoned beasts of the Saintess were being killed so easily. "Hey!" Jian's call startled her so much that she felt like her eyes might pop out. Is he the final boss of some villain story? What a strange male lead. Jian was thrilled with this scene of slaughter, asking her if there was anything else and to bring it all out. His gaze was like that of a fierce beast staring intently. The guard was unable to take even a step, let alone respond. Knowing she couldn't stay in the house since there was no door, she turned and fled in a hurry. Jian didn't bother to chase after her. He was exhausted from dealing with the stubborn ones, and he could ignore cowards like her. Jin Myung silently assessed him. Suddenly, a loud scream from Sung Jae echoed from the door, the boy completely drenched, bursting in to warn him about the troublemakers attacking recklessly. To his surprise, the inside of the appraisal shop was the chaotic mess following John's rampage. Wasn't this the beast summoned by the saintess? That was how others viewed the summoned beast. But to Jian, these were merely pieces of materials that had fallen for him to collect. Sung Jae urged him to leave, fearing that if the guards brought more people, it would become quite troublesome. Just as they were about to leave, Jin Myung shouted loudly. As both turned to look, he hesitated. 20 years ago, he had followed Li Jian to learn the crafting methods, so he remembered very clearly how he fought monsters and gathered materials. With all of his courage, he loudly asked, "Was that you in the earlier battle? Was it Li Jian?" He didn't answer, only raised his finger to his lips, signaling for silence. But his expression spoke volumes. He appeared mysterious, with a dreamy soul. Jin Myung, sensitive by nature, picked up on the signal and immediately felt emotional, crying softly. Hoo-hoo! Jian, likely afraid of shedding tears, turned around and left, promising to continue the conversation next time. That was enough to make Jin Myung extremely happy. He bowed deeply and shouted, "I hope to see you again next time, esteemed guest." He lightly nodded and left, leaving the dilapidated room for the old man. It was indeed an effective way to avoid cleaning up the place. After leaving the appraisal shop, the two of them, Sung Jia and Jian, found a very reasonable place to escape from the pursuit, a brightly lit cafe in the middle of the street selling all kinds of ice creams and cakes. This guy, who was already 40 years old, was still shoveling massive spoonfuls of ice cream into his mouth, very pleased. Sung Jae, it's so delicious. Eat up. Eat a lot. Seeing John's determined expression as he faced the food on the table, Sung Jae hesitantly asked, "It's delicious, but just by looking at it, I can tell it's expensive. Do we have money to pay?" Of course, Jian had no money, but his skill in picking up dropped items from others was exceptional. He held up the item that the female bodyguard had lost, claiming he had examined it for a while and thought it seemed usable. The yellowish object with a spilled water bottle logo seemed like a guardian's emblem, functioning like a credit card and containing some skills of those people. Sung Jae looked more closely and realized this resembled a personal credit card. The fear was that if they used it, they would trace them here. But who cares that much? Jian is just happy to have some sweets. Ignoring his nephew's lack of appetite, he continued eating from this cup to that bowl until Sungyuk approached, greeting him. Looking at the expressions of these two, it's clear that no one wants Commander Song to show up here. He greets Sung Jia but asked for a seat at this table to talk to Jian. Realizing that Sungyuk is the boss who's been bothering Sung Jia for a few days, he can send him away and let him sit down. Sungyuk immediately asked, "Are you the one who killed the Spider Queen that Sung Jae mentioned?" He seemed oblivious to John's unwillingness to answer, saying that if even Yang Wei couldn't handle that spider, then a young person like me must be quite impressive to have done it. What do you intend to do about it? Jian was already on his third ice cream, moving to the fourth. He kept hearing Sungyuk say he was here to seek out exceptional talents. It was clear he wanted to lure Jian into this holy assembly, so Jian asked what he had to offer as persuasion. One of the 8 holy relics of Li Jian will be going to auction soon. If you're free, can we discuss that a bit? Finally, John's attention was caught. He set down his ice cream spoon, showing a look of its time as they were auctioning his artifacts. With cream smeared all over his face, Jian looked up and said he would go straight to the auction house. Samyuk didn't mock his silly rustic appearance. On the contrary, he was very friendly, stating that Li Jian's artifacts would be showcased in a place of equal stature, quite far from where they were. It was the highest auction house ever, situated high up in the sky in a city called Prosperous Fortress Drachma. This fortress city wasn't large, but it was unique because it was built on a floating island in the sky. It was lavishly decorated, and the Drachma auction house had an entire skyscraper dedicated to hosting auctions for one-of-a-kind items. In the waiting hall of Drachma, Selphie was sitting on a bench, clutching her neck and trying to breathe. She was wearing the beautiful saintess outfit, but was trembling all over, her face ashen as if she were sitting in the middle of a snowstorm, until a deep voice echoed through the hall. It was Stephen Maker, and he grumbled, "Stop that look, you're rooting the wine here." Selphie glanced at the giant man, grumbling to herself about how he was a dimwit with developed limbs, but she had to endure it for the time being to avoid disaster. This was a man who had surpassed even Li Jian. Being next to Stephen Maker made Selphie feel safe. He stood up abruptly and walked away, not forgetting to remind her of a familiar saying. All of Lee Jeon's weapons in this auction belong to him. Don't get any ideas and then regret it too late. She called after him anxiously, but the lion-say didn't respond and just kept walking. Left alone in the grand hall, Sophie took a deep breath and tried to calm herself. Anyway, this is Drachma. Whether real or fake, the person she always feared couldn't possibly appear here. But the person on the other side of the glass suddenly caught Sophie's attention. It was Hugo Otter standing alone in the aisle. Her mood shifted dramatically, feeling delighted that this guy had arrived just in time. It seemed like something entertaining was about to happen. Hugo arrived here not for the antiques, but had been wandering around for a while without seeing his friend Jian. He thought that a place with so many expensive holy relics would attract his friend's attention, which was why he came, but it was only the brat who came to bother him. She lightly nudged Hugo's shoulder from behind, smiling as she said, "Long time no see." Huh? The cheerful face of the brat under the hood made him shiver. Meeting anyone other than Sophie at this moment was unfortunate. She acted as if they were long-lost friends and started with, "It's really hard to run into you. It seems not even Hugo Otters can conquer time. I remember we used to represent the 12 Saints." But Sophie always had a way of throwing shade. How could she miss out on the fact that the Zodiac Council had few members, which placed Hugo in a lower position than the others? Still busy looking for his friend, Hugo didn't want to continue the conversation, waving her off. But Sophie knew everything, except when to be sensible. With an arrogant expression, she blurted out a harsh comment that left Hugo frozen. "Be careful you don't lose your child, just like you lost your wife." The fake smile on Aquarius's face widened as she continued to dig into the matter, repeatedly asking him if he thought his wife was dead. Hugo's silence only encouraged her to push harder. Even if he were a saint like Sagittarius, he would still have to helplessly watch his family fall apart. Aquarius successfully drove someone as calm as Hugo to the edge, his entire being ignited with a fierce rage. Where the two had just stood, an explosion shattered the walls. Amidst the black smoke, Hugo was engulfed in flames, his eyes ablaze with fury. "I'm talking about you, get out." Sophie, however, did not let it go so easily. She raised her hand to her mouth, hibbling, and used water to douse the fire on Hugo's arm, reminding him, "We have a 10-year truce, don't forget that." In truth, seeing Hugo so furious brought obvious delight to Aquarius, who stepped closer to him and asked, "Don't you realize that you're just a half-saint?" Before Sophie could unleash the water she had just summoned, a voice called out from behind, and a white light burst forth. Jian had just called, "You have a lot of nerve," and he flicked his fingers against Aquarius's forehead, bringing her to an immediate realization. The spot where the water drop hit Sophie's forehead turned bright red, her eyes filled with the whites. It was unclear if she had gained insight or if she had just logged out completely. Jian looked at Sophie's lifeless body on the ground with disgust, while his friend turned to him and said, "Hey man, why is it getting so intense right now?" Hearing Hugo worry that he had been doing something foolish, Jian crossed his arms in confusion and asked, "Am I 3 years old, or do you like me?" Feeling the tense atmosphere, Jian closed his jacket and kept his backside away from Hugo, not forgetting to express a constipated look on his face. Looking at the twisted body on the ground, he said, "Why do I always run into this crazy girl everywhere? Don't tell me this crazy girl likes me." Hugo was at a loss for words. Had this guy taken anything before coming here? In your eyes, Jian might be the guy who has been overly buffed and turned into a freak, but in Sophie's eyes, he is not just that. Aquarius thinks she hates Jian, but in reality, she is truly afraid of him. She fears his scarred face, deep scars, and his aggressive personality. He never spares anyone who provokes him, and those blind white eyes always throw a sharp, contemptuous glance towards Sophie, something she can never forget. One stormy day over 20 years ago, in the Aquarius Shrine, there was a clamor of his subordinates trying to block Jian's fierce advance. The housekeeper of the Aquarius estate rushed out with open arms, determined not to let him go any further. In the flash of lightning, its hideous face uttered a single word, "Get out! What is going on?" Sophie's voice made him turn around, seeing her in her nightgown, irritated with her arms crossed, asking, "What the hell do you think you're doing barging in here?" With a sudden bang, Li Jian slammed his fist against the wall behind Sophie, scaring her. His eyes were etched with anger, highlighting several dark brown scars as he gritted his teeth and asked, "Do you really want to die?" Bao Bin tried her best to sound tough and asked, "What the hell are you doing?" These words will only drive Li Jian insane. He questioned why she was still lingering around the shrine, even though he had sent her back to the rear to treat those injured by the monster attacks. He tightened his grip on her hand and shouted, "Their limbs are broken trying to protect you. Do you understand?" "Enough talk," he said, grabbing her wrist and pulling her along, forcing Sophie to go save people, no matter what. No, those people could die and no one would care. Dying for me and humanity is an honor. How can you look down on the saints like that? I've endured enough insults from humanity. I won't bother cleaning up that trash. Her stubborn words made Li Jun freeze. He turned his bandaged face toward her and asked, "What did you just say?" Putting her hand up to cover her nose, complaining that Jian stank like a pile of garbage, Sophie insisted, "I am definitely not going to treat the injured. I need to go sleep now so I can wake up and put on makeup for my interview tomorrow." Sophie yanked her restrained wrist away from John, still wincing at the swollen spot from his tight grip with a look of disdain. Jian's hand suddenly shot out and slapped Bao Bin across the face, making her feel like her teeth might fly out. He shouted directly with an angry voice, echoing throughout the shrine, then dragged her for treatment until she collapsed from exhaustion. Thus, for Sophie, Li Jun was a damn bastard. She was cursing him fiercely. Li Jun's face appeared and asked, "Did you sleep well?" Sophie's eyes dimly recognized that she had just drooled in her sleep, her whole body tightly bound to the chair. Directly in front was Li Jun with his familiar disdainful face, and Hugo Otters standing beside him. Realizing she was in the hands of the one she feared the most, she let out a scream that reverberated throughout the building. After screaming, she continued, "Who do you think you are to dare to do this to a saintess? Release me at once. Release me at once. I want to slap you again." This old hag's mouth probably wouldn't change at all whether it had 20 years or 200 years of age. Sophie's mind kept rolling inside, telling herself, "I'm not afraid of him like I was 20 years ago anymore. Today I will be clear with him." Her hand glowed, the light of acid to dissolve the bindings. Sophie's plan was to escape this place and go find Stephen Maker for a showdown, but she ended up getting another snap, nearly bursting her forehead, trembling with anger and helplessness. Li Jun's index finger was still smoking, reminding her, "If you're planning anything, don't let it show on your face, guide." At this moment, John's finger was still emitting smoke. The hag looked up and laughed heartily. "That's an acid self-defense skill, activated whenever someone uses violence against me." She let out a joyful shriek, and Sophie's mind was filled with painful images of Jian being corroded by acid all over his body, begging her for mercy. "Aha, is your strongest skill? I also have something very strong." He raised his middle finger at her, but the acid had disappeared at some point. However, he wasn't foolish enough to brag about having the absurd ability to heal himself, which had left Aquarius terrified, screaming in disbelief. "All right, are we done chatting happily? Let Li Jian settle the score for what has happened between us, shall we? I heard you claim to be my support person." A first snap of his fingers. "Those ridiculous terrorists in the appraisal shop were sent by you, right? Almost 10 of them, but let's settle it with 5 snaps to keep things friendly. And what was that nonsense you said to Tiksu earlier? Add another 50 snaps." Seeing her tearful face, Li Jian kept his hand poised and asked, "Hey, do you have anything else to say?" After a moment of silence, he thrust his hand forward. "Here's what you were waiting for. Your incredibly smug face makes me wonder if you're the villain here." Her ongoing protests echoed incessantly. Hugo found no reason to intervene. That awkward friend of his was just like that. Whether male or female, they were all treated the same way. Even if Li Jun had ample reasons to act that way, Hugo would never hit a woman. At most, like just now, he would just hit the wall a bit. But wait, is there something wrong with my eyes? I feel like John's power is increasing with each snap he makes. Hugo wasn't mistaken. With each flick on the jar's forehead, he was able to extract her divine power. The unbeatable flicking saint was in high spirits. Sophie suddenly collapsed in a perplexing manner. Her forehead was swollen in several spots and foam was frothing in her mouth, signs that she had fainted. Jian finally stopped. The system rapidly popped up before him, congratulating him that his current divine power had reached 50% and successfully unlocked the holy divine power. What new terminology is this? Can't you look it up on Google for me? What is the holy divine status, my friend? It was simply because he was an abandoned child, not blessed by any zodiac sign that he didn't know. It was the power needed to sustain divinity. Knowing late had its perks, as the system informed him that if he didn't have it, he could take it by force. Whether it was divine power or holy divine status, ultimately it all came down to having to take it. Indeed, it was the system. Jian rubbed his confusing head, having earned 20% divine power from just a few flicks on the jar. Why hadn't he received anything after beating Yang Wei badly before? Was it because the skill hadn't been unlocked then? Yet now, he received news that he could still increase his power. Jian began to feel quite cheerful. The method of increasing power was generally effortless. Just go beat others to take it. Hugo, standing behind him, reminded him to interrogate this jar regarding the dagger, but Jian brushed it off. This woman definitely wasn't someone who would dare stab me in the back. Besides, I've already found someone who can investigate it for me. Hugo nodded, pretending to understand, but his mind was full of hidden thoughts about his friend. It turned out he was just looking for an excuse to act against Sophie Marty all along. Suddenly, the phone in his pants pocket vibrated. Hugo leaned in, curiously asking where he got the phone. Jian casually replied that he borrowed it from an acquaintance and then flashed a smile, showing off his teeth as if advertising some toothpaste. He said he was going to the auction hall. Hugo wanted to throw the crazy girl away anywhere. After finishing his sentence, he quickly left, just like someone who sets things up for others to clean up. That left him and the crazy girl who had just been knocked out. Suddenly, the door opened again. Hugo thought his friend had forgotten something and turned back, but the newcomer made him extremely tense. In a world of 8 billion people, why did it have to be this bearded guy? In front of Hugo stood Stephen Maker, looming large, just like the male lead in a story. The guy's gaze flicked over, and he immediately noticed the girl tied up in a chair behind Hugo, unconscious. Hugo had no intention of explaining and just stared at Stephen, who was suddenly angry, with a bunch of yellow electricity crackling around him, asking, "Hey, Hugo, what are you doing here?" It was just a question, but why did it sound so threatening? Turns out the girl was Stephen's ally. He took off his expensive yellow glasses, looking like a superhero preparing to transform, with a visage resembling a werewolf. He reminded Hugo that it had been a while since they last saw each other, but there was no time to get tied up in that. "Dan, do you think I have so much free time to start trouble with you?" Stephen looked at the Aquarius, looking just like a dog that has eaten poison, and he said, "I form an alliance with her." "What kind of alliance is it that only has 2 people?" "That's basically it. Now tell me, why are you here, Hugo?" He probably thought by asking this question, Hugo would answer. Where to go is a personal right, why ask such a thing? But the guy just stuffed his glasses into his chest, the tight body shirt hugging his well-developed chest, and then clicked his tongue and asked, "Did you come here for John's holy relic?" "Probably not, because if you did, you wouldn't have the money to buy it, right?" Damn, I know Hugo is poor, but these two really match to form an alliance. Each of them opens their mouth and digs into Sagittarius's poverty, Hugo thought. Stephen smiled, showing his bright white teeth, and boldly asked, "Are you still collecting the holy relics that Jian created?" Since ancient times, when Jian still existed among the 13 saints, Stephen has always felt inferior to him, taking Jian as a benchmark to strive to surpass. He has always been gathering all the holy relics related to him. "Hey, don't tell me you think that continuing to do this will make you strong enough to be on par with Jian." Stephen said nothing, blowing away the dirt and rocks beneath his feet. Indeed, Hugo's words had hit the right spot. He intended to say a few words, but Stephen really blew the floor away. Hugo cautiously summoned flames to surround himself, only to see lightning emanating from Stephen's hands. He couldn't strike at Hugo, but grabbed his wrist, squeezing it hard enough to make his half vanish. Hugo began to feel fear as he sensed Stephen's grip getting stronger by the day. The man's fierce gaze warned him not to take any risks. With every word Stephen uttered, his muscular fingers tightened a little more, reminding Hugo, "You are just a fool, so don't mention Jian in front of me." As soon as he finished speaking, he twisted Hugo's arm behind him, his entire body radiating an image of divinity behind him, as if to prove his strength had far surpassed that of the Jian statue. "Saint, there's trouble," a subordinate came to report. The twins had purchased all of Jian's items. The man suddenly turned back, forcefully pushing Hugo away, realizing he couldn't waste any more time with him, and left immediately with his subordinate. Hugo called after Stephen to take this crazy woman away, but he didn't pay much attention, even telling Hugo to do whatever he wanted. Right now, the top priority was the auction, and this old woman could wait. Before leaving, he kindly reminded him, "You want to live, you should control your own temperament." Being careful, Hugo smirked sarcastically. "Your reminder is so touching that it chills my heart." Once Stephen was far away, Hugo dared to look down. His hand was badly burned from the electric jolt of the Lion Saint. The feeling of inadequacy surged in Hugo's heart. He knew he was not okay at all because he had always been the weakest among the 12 blessed zodiac signs. The Drachma auction house shines brightly like a heavenly realm. Through the glass doors of the corridor, the closed VIP room can be seen in the auction area. The excited female MC strikes the gavel to finalize an item for Gemini. Now there will be a break to prepare for the second round. That's all it took. The young people in the room let out a cheer of excitement. Li Jian has secured another interesting item for himself. Songyuk, sitting next to him, congratulates him on buying what he wanted. At this moment, Jian scratches his head sheepishly, thanking him for inviting him into the VIP room, allowing him to shop comfortably. It's thanks to him that Jian could gather this collection of items. Choi Songyuk adjusts his glasses, reminding him that this is all to recruit him into the Gemini cult, not noticing that Sung Jae sitting beside them has already spent billions. He glances over at Sung Jae and asks, "Can you take care of the payment for this drink?" "I forgot my card." "I wouldn't dare go against your orders, boss," Sung Jae replies as he reaches for his wallet. Jian pulls out a dirty black card and casually says, "Today's on me." Songjia reaches into his empty pocket, wondering, when did this guy get a black card without me knowing? Jian waves the card in his hand, reminding him, anyway, don't ask your subordinates to pay for you. Being told this directly, Songyuk doesn't dare to object and keeps a smile on his face, but he gradually realizes that this guy looks young but seemed to enjoy bossing others around. Nonetheless, he has successfully defeated the Spider Queen. Songyuk's task is to make use of this talented person for his own cult. Wait a little longer. When Jian had drunk a lot of alcohol, Songyuk began the main topic of the day with a long, flattering speech. The potential of this brother is at least S or SS rank. If blessed by the Aries Society, he will undoubtedly develop greatly. Jian took a sip of his drink, realizing that the pale purple Miss Songyuk had just released had the effect of manipulating others' minds, just like scammers do. Songyuk showcased all his persuasive skills to Jian, talking about money, jewels, wealth, glory, and a respected career. Joining the Aries Society would give you everything, all for free, completely free, and promised that you would gain power stronger than even mine. Come on, take my hand, and let's conquer the path to bring Aries to the heights of glory. It sounded grand and convincing, but suddenly Jian burst out laughing. Today is so fun, great speech. Then he changed his expression and asked seriously, so are you telling me to become the hunting dog of that bald pig? Choi Sungyuk suddenly felt sweat pouring down his head. The man in front of him, who had previously seemed like a comfortable country youth, now felt like he was getting angry. He was about to change the subject to cool down the atmosphere when the voice of an auction staff member rang out from outside the door. Excuse me, I'm here to deliver the newly finalized item. He looked at the silly thing the staff member had just presented and thought to himself, it's my item, so I'll take it. Yet they still insist on handing over the power of attorney later. How ridiculous. At that moment, Choi Sungyuk realized that he had just closed a deal on an item from the St. John. He smiled, picked up the necklace shaped like the number 8, and said, this would be quite useful for me. Sungyuk thought to himself that he had been foolish. He had been so careless that this young man might snatch the item from Steven. If that big boy stormed in and punched each of them, they would all be in trouble. He was about to advise Jian to return it when suddenly the VIP room door seemed to explode, flying apart in multiple directions with dust and smoke filling the air, causing all 4 of them to turn around. Seeing Steven charge in fiercely, muttering curses, "You bastard!" Noticing the tense expression on Steven's face as if he had just been robbed of a valuable item, he growled, "Who touched my stuff?" It turned out to be someone familiar. Jian turned to see the foolish young man who had burst through the door in a showy manner, half surprised, half not, realizing that this was the one hunting for his collection of holy relics. Choi Sungyuk stepped forward, taking on the role of the negotiating king, the diplomatic warrior. Sorry and all that, it's just because that new guy from the countryside doesn't know any better. Seeing the leader's attitude, Steven calmed down a bit. As long as they returned the item, everything would be fine. Seeing that things seemed to be going smoothly, Choi Sungyuk suggested that Steven go down to the reception to pay and then collect the items. Unexpectedly, the guy let out a sinister laugh, firmly grabbing Sungyuk's head and asking, "Are you planning to touch my stuff and then sneak away?" He trembled under the large hand, not daring to resist, only muttering inwardly, "This pig guy is looking for an excuse to take my stuff without paying. Hey, stop talking nonsense for a moment." Jian's voice came from the sofa, causing both to turn and look. "Hey, I won the auction, so I bought it. Why are you demanding my stuff? If you like it so much, I'll sell it to you for 200 billion, plus a protection fee. You win." Steven didn't know who this obnoxious guy in front of him was to be so arrogant. A few seconds later, he burst into loud laughter. I never expected someone from the White Deer Holy Society to be so mouthy. Choi Sungyuk felt like collapsing. Did this brat want to commit suicide? Even the Saint Lion dared to provoke. Men should be like that. There's no reason to talk to me if he can't back it up. Steven pushed Sungyuk aside and swaggered towards Jian, his hand beginning to emit electricity, playing the part of a wise guy. "Let's introduce ourselves, brother. Then I'll make my mark with the most reputable neck twist, electrified of course." With a provocative smirk, Jian asked, "Where did this dog bite you?" In his mind, he thought that this big guy could really be intimidating, much stronger than before. It's true that the zodiac sign is very suitable for fighting. It's all about the welcome and the clashes of battle. The king of the fortress has a mark, loves to fight. Although the fighting spirit is not as persistent and enduring as Aries or Aquarius, with this level of progress, this lion cannot be ignored. Once it flaunts its strength, no matter what is said, it must tear that person apart to vent its anger, right? Jian wanted to see a lion clawing its claws at a snake, wondering what would happen. Being hot-headed means dying at my hands, you hear. He wanted to advise Steven like that, but he didn't say it. Just let that giant hand rush toward him. Those huge fingers just touched Janon's shoulder and electric sparks stirred the atmosphere. The people around were so frightened that they almost wet their pants just wanting to run away. At this rate, death was certain. Sung Jae still tried to shout, "Brother," while Samyuk had many thoughts in his head. Stephen had no intention of killing him, just aimed to disable his legs so he would need a wheelchair. Strangely enough, a comfortable smile appeared on the lips of the young man in front of him. He yelled, "Hey, are you brushing dust off my shirt?" Stephen did not understand what had just happened, because the move he executed definitely had a direct impact on him. It couldn't possibly miss. Did the user teleport to change the direction of my attack? The Geminis are the best at this, but John never runs. He pushed Stephen's hand away and continued to curse. Indeed, a dumb mind leads to developed limbs. Ha ha, your attack has been neutralized by me. Do you have any other skills that can affect me? I remember back then you begged me to teach you to save humanity, and now you're flaunting your strength like a fool. Ha! Not to mention the brilliant aura surrounding Jian. That story was known only to the 13th Saint and Stephen. Therefore, the man was pale, not understanding who this person was. Suddenly, a welcome voice rang out in the auction hall. "Dear friends and guests, welcome back to the second round." Stephen then shifted his attention there, no longer paying any heed to Jian. He turned away, pointed at Jian, and said, "The auction is something important that needs to be dealt with first. Keep that necklace tight, I'll come find you later." As Stephen walked away, Song Jae ran up to him to check if he had any dents on his body. Only his shoulder was torn as if bitten by a dog. Samyuk saw but didn't dare to approach and ask, "How did he dodge earlier?" While a divine-level attack from Stephen cannot be deflected, even an S-level commander like Samyuk couldn't do that. This strange, indifferent demeanor only made Samyuk more curious. Who exactly is this young man? In the second round of the auction, the host announced, "This is a holy relic that everyone eagerly wishes to behold. Surely you remember the Berlin event 24 years ago, or an island in Germany. A strange mist lingered in the area, melting all types of weapons and towers. It was so fearsome that the 12 saints had no way to enter that area except for the hero Li Jian. Now we will reveal a holy relic that Li Jian once used to tame the calamity." Stephen couldn't help but smile. After a long wait, that item was finally within reach. He remembered the day 24 years ago on the impregnable island in Germany. Helicopters hovered over the island, constantly updating the news. It had been 4 days since Li Jian entered, and no one knew what was inside because he had not come out. Many saints, including Stephen, tried to enter, but they remained on the outskirts of the central area. Stephen was unwilling to accept that Jian could charge in alone while he could not. Even though he was fully equipped and had an escort, he sat there thinking for a long time, trying to figure out the difference between himself and that scarred bastard which led to such a stark power disparity. Suddenly, a subordinate pointed to the right, reporting that Li Jian had come out and brought with him something that Stephen was sure was the answer he had been searching for. The journalist watched in shock as Li Jian emerged, truly returning unscathed, carrying a giant bone. At that time, Li Jian always wore a mask when outside to avoid drawing attention, adding another achievement snatched from him. But this time, Stephen was not irritated. It was as if he had realized something important and gently called for his troops to retreat. When the saint discarded the weapon in his hand, his subordinates were surprised and learned that Stephen had something better for himself. The moment Stephen saw Li Jian emerge, he looked at him and knew the answer. The item that would put him on par with Li Jian was indeed a weapon. So now, in the auction hall, when they unveiled the weapon that Li Jian had used in the Wolf Battle of Berlin, everyone turned their attention to it. Li Jian also fixed his eyes on it to see what it was. As soon as the cloth was pulled away, Stephen couldn't help but smile. It was the thing he had been waiting for to become the world champion, a gigantic bone. Li Jian had carried the enormous bone away when he left the Misty Island. Outside the Drachma Tower, where the grand auction event was taking place, a strange creature suddenly jumped down from somewhere. It was clearly a calamity, landing silently on the top of the tower. It had come for Li Jian's holy relic, but without money to buy it, it now planned to steal. Let me proudly present the gigantic bone. The camera zoomed in on the bone. The audience gasped in amazement. They had only seen it in history books before, and now they had the chance to see it in person. Does this mean that the textbooks were right about it being Li Jian's classic weapon? The female host praised the object, and the crowd roared 10 times louder. Meanwhile, he stood there remembering the event from 24 years ago. Indeed, he had used that bone to fight the calamity, but could it really be as divine as this? Just as he was about to call Sung Jae to tell his nephew the truth, he suddenly yelled back, "I'm busy, tell me later." Then both Sung Jae and Sungyuk held their heads in despair as the twin saints had no way to acquire this item. The giant bone started with a price of $1 million. The entire audience roared as the price surged from $1 million to $10 million, then shot up to $35 million, $50 million. With each shout of the bid, the system continuously announced John's name, points, and experience, causing John's experience to increase to a level that felt like it would crush him. Still sensing his mind clouded, he was about to ask what was so special about the giant bone that everyone was fighting over. Was it for licking? Sung Jae's shout suggested that he was a country bumpkin who didn't understand anything. All the items that the hero Lee Jun had ever used, whether it was a toothpick or a pair of foam sandals used for farming, anything created by Lee Jun drove people wild. He pointed to Stephen Maker, a collector of Lee Jun's divine weapons from all over the world. Because the Lion Saint was a fighter with overwhelming strength, everyone tried to avoid provoking him during the auction of the divine weapons. Thinking about most of Lee Jun's divine weapons being in cabinets, Stephen felt very angry, only managing to console himself that all the profits for the auction would be transferred to Lee Jun's account managed by the government. Stop it for about 5 seconds, meaning that no matter who buys it, the money still goes into his pocket. Ha ha ha, whoever wants to buy can bid. Let's raise the price. Jian would never question why the audience excitedly threw money at buying a dog bone again. He enjoyed the feeling as his wealth soared from 70 million to 90 million, then $100 million. Suddenly, a loud roar erupted from the audience, $1 billion. While chewing on popcorn, a sudden psychological shock hit. Sung Jae's eyes widened, Sung Yup's eyes bulged, and everyone was looking towards the person who just called out that number. Who else but Stephen, with his hands in his pockets, walked down and repeated with a look on his face that said, "It's $1 billion for me. Sell me that bone right now." The MC up there was still in shock, stammering, $1 billion. The audience's hair stood on end. They would have to empty their houses to gather that amount of money. Who could compete with Stephen? Sung Jae was unwilling to accept it. Sung Yup was frustrated, and Jian felt like he was suffocating with anxiety. Finally, the sound of the hammer sealing the deal rang out, and the giant bone was officially sold for $1 billion. In the hallway, some janitors were pushing a cart to clean up while discussing the giant dog bone that had been bought for $1 billion. One person clicked his tongue, saying that workers like him could never dream of even a tenth of that amount. "I wish there were something big that could change life," he murmured. Just after he finished that sentence, both of them heard a noise. Outside the glass door of the Draxma building was the entire face of the Calamity Beast peering in. "Don't tell me it's responding to my prayers and has appeared." This move was wrong. I retract my previous statement. Inside the auction hall, Stephen had successfully touched the dream weapon. The new owner of the giant bone was now revealed before the envious eyes of everyone in the stands. They were cheering in various ways when suddenly the entire ceiling collapsed, burying a crowd of people who were shouting. Stephen walked over to see what it was, not forgetting to carry the giant bone worth $1 billion. From the large hole emerged a bunch of black hair, as if someone had just hired a model for a shampoo commercial. But this model looked truly powerful, with eyes brighter than headlights. The crowd cried out and ran away, dropping their pants, leaving a titan-like creature of the horse's face scanning for Lee John's holy relic. What could be worse than just winning an auction for your favorite item, only to have someone rush in to steal it? The titan creature opened its long mouth, full of fangs, aiming its descent at Stephen, who was still holding the bone. Of course, Stephen wasn't afraid of anyone. His eyes lit up as he swung one end of the bone, hitting the titan creature and sending it flying backward, just like a baseball player. With a single swing, the monster was sent crashing far away, smashing into 2 buildings in succession. Stephen's roaring laughter echoed amidst the chaos. For the first time, I have to thank the Titans for showing up. Ha ha ha. The giant bone without a glass case has appeared beside me. Stephen was extremely cool. He had just experienced the power of the coveted holy relic he had long desired, so he was overflowing with excitement. Another group of Titans rushed in, but it was all good. Just after he started to laugh, Stephen suddenly fell silent. Immediately, the tower across from him was struck by the giant Titan, collapsing uncontrollably. It was the tower from the teleportation area. Once it fell, it would blow away the entire island beneath it. Truly, it looked like a contractor had cut corners on the construction. Above, an explosion erupted, and below, the sound of shattering followed. Rocks and debris fell upon the heads of the people strolling beneath. Only the supporting actors suffered, having done nothing wrong, yet being forced by the author to die. Among the crowd, a girl screamed that if all the debris fell on the island, it would collapse. "All disciples, let us gather our strength to stop them." Those from the different holy orders nearby heard the SOS signal and joined forces to assist. Hundreds of people below combined their strength into a sphere, channeling all their energy into it, donating to the Adonis Recap channel, creating a magnificent sight. But just seconds later, they realized the pieces of the tower were crashing down. They began to panic, rushing to save their lives. The roar of Hugo echoed with Apollo's fury. Above them, A swirling firestorm appeared, incinerating all the remains of the tower. After a moment, as the flames gradually subsided, the people below realized they had just been saved perfectly. No debris was left. It turned out that the Saint Centaur Hugo Otters was flying above with his dazzling rocket bow. It had been a long time since he had the chance to make a grand appearance before the public, waving to accept their thanks while not forgetting to curse the foolish lion who didn't know what control was. Suddenly, a loud explosion echoed from not far away. A different colored monstrosity broke through the ground, slowly wading toward the crowd of people. It looked like a dog completely stripped of its skin, with a skeleton encased in armor on the outside. Hugo shivered as he realized that this was another monstrosity, different from the last one. It seemed this place would turn into a battlefield. Thick black liquid poured from the monstrosity's mouth. At first glance, it looked like blood, but it was even darker than that. The substance spread across the ground, then suddenly rose up like living creatures, rushing toward the crowd to attack. They leaped up, clinging directly to the faces of the unfortunate individuals, stretching to cover their eyes, noses, and mouths, leaving them unable to move. Hugo's eyes ignited with fury. How dare this filth harm the townspeople right in the sight of the divine? He readied his bow, preparing to release an arrow. Behind him, a ferocious roar was heard, and Tixo turned around, his gaze filled with unusual astonishment. A green monstrosity appeared right behind him, opening its mouth full of shark teeth like a crocodile chasing its prey, wanting to make him its dinner. Tixu had no time to react or dodge. He could only stare intently at the jaws of the vicious monstrosity. At that moment, he felt as if he would meet his deceased wife. A powerful force struck the side of the monstrosity, causing it to be thrown backward. Li Jian used his powerful kick to save him from a certain goal. He shouted at Tixu, "Calm down for me." Then he applied more force and kicked the stubborn ball further away. The ball had no time to resist, soaring away like a soccer ball and landing on the ground alongside Li Jian. Tixu looked at him with a grateful gaze, his face bright with thanks. Unexpectedly, he was doused with cold water and then bombarded with continuous insults. "Hey, when you're fighting, why are you still in saint mode and weaker than a half-hearted guy like me? I can't help but feel irritated watching you. Even a worm will squirm when pressed too hard. You're yelling too much." Tixu stood up and snapped back. "What are you talking about? I tried my best." As they argued fiercely, suddenly a shout echoed through the blue sky, cutting off the debate between the two friends. Jian and Tixo turned their heads towards the source of the sound and saw Stephen rushing toward them with a piece of bone, his entire body crackling with sparks. Stephen shouted loudly, "How dare you interrupt my holy relic experience?"